Welcome to the Reinventor's Mindset, insights about transformation with leaders who've done it from the inside. I'm Ashton Jones and I'm writing Bold Water, a book about transformation. Today, I'm speaking with Nicole Lindner, a portfolio executive who's worked across CBA, NAB, Westpac, AT Kearney, Capgemini, Gartner and Unisys. Nicole holds a master's in AI and expert systems from UNSW and has spent 2 decades teaching leaders how organisations actually change. Nicole and I first met on a panel at the Australian Consortium of Entrepreneurship Research Excellence, which is either a great place to find reinventors or a very long name for a very interesting room. Welcome, Nicole. Let's dive in.
Thank you, Ashton. It's great to be here.
Now, Nicole, one of the things I think that you and I share in common is we're both very passionate about this concept of a portfolio career. Would you be able to share with myself and the listeners, what is a portfolio career and how have you thought about your portfolio career?
I think a portfolio career is a career that has got many, many branches. So you still have the trunk,
Yes.
the stem,
Yes.
you know what I mean, of your career, which generally comes from, something that you're very skilled at, very experienced at, generally tends to be the job you've trained for, essentially. But as time goes on, what you find is that there are some very attractive opportunities that sort of branch off from that main stem. And it's lovely to be able to take advantage of those. It shouldn't be an either or.
Yes.
It's an and.
Yes.
And, naturally early on in your career, you have to spend a lot of time learning and developing and building up your skill sets, building your brand and so forth. But I think particularly at that mid-career point,
Yes.
a portfolio career becomes very attractive and you can combine, what I would call sort of the day job
Yes.
with advisory work.
Yes.
With some forays into academia, speaking and research opportunities.
Yes.
Just also being seen as a mentor, a coach,
Yes.
a sponsor, and maybe even having your own consulting business off the side.
Yes.
And also, of course, boards.
Yes. And why do you think, Nicole, that portfolio careers have become more attractive to people? I think particularly over the last 10 years, I've found that, I'm very much seeing people who have pursued portfolio careers at different life moments or life events. But now it feels like it's a much more commonplace way to think about one's career rather than through this sort of linear trunk to something that can branch out of it over time.
Look, I think you're absolutely right because I think our whole idea about career has changed.
100%.
When I was a child growing up, and I'm a Gen Xer, a mid-Gen Xer, and, you were very much role modelled on your parents who had tended to have jobs pretty much for life.
Yes.
So it was not uncommon
Yes.
for people to spend 30 years
At the same company,
at the same company,
job.
in the
Yes.
same job, not even moving around
you're right,
in different,
you're right.
different roles. And I think it was always very, very much, a company was loyal to you if you were loyal to it. And I think a lot of that changed with technology.
Yes.
So technology not only democratized the market, made it a lot easier for people to move
Yeah,
jobs.
the employment market. yeah.
Exactly. And to also, I think, reach out and build their networks. So I think probably around the sort of mid-2000s, we're seeing that big change as the baby boomers are starting to move into their sort of board careers and so forth. And there's a little bit of a exit that's happening
from the
with them.
traditional workforce. Yeah.
But also at the same time, you're seeing Gen X and even in some cases Gen Y
Yes.
starting to do different things. And I think it's been popularised now, I think, as the side hustle.
Yeah.
But I know people who have the side hustle, off the side hustle, off the side hustle. And, it's how many sides? You're looking at a hexagon, not a square.
Well, it's interesting you use the term side hustle because I personally, I don't love the term side hustle, I must admit, because there's almost there's a connotation to it.
I agree. And I don't think it's necessarily a positive connotation.
Yeah, exactly. And what I think about a lot is identity, right?
Yep.
And I was talking to someone earlier today about identity and, this concept that historically people's career identity was very associated with their current employer,
Absolutely.
their current job. And these moments happen where that gets disrupted. Could be redundancy.
Yep.
It could be a need to take a step back, pregnancy.
Yep, in my case.
Yeah,
it's disrupted quite a bit.
And so I've always seen the portfolio career as a way to integrate all the different parts of your identity,
Correct.
because people's identity is rarely a single thing or a single aspect of themselves. And so I'm just interested to hear what different parts of your identity does your portfolio career serve for you?
Look, I think there's always that need to, develop our skills and develop ourselves.
Yes.
And companies uh, probably have become less good at that. So as workers become less permanent, and particularly with the rise of contract-based work,
Yes.
things like that, companies are less reluctant. If you're only going to be with, I think the typical time in a role now is between 3 and 5 years.
Yeah.
If you're going to be with the company for that amount of time, why should we invest in you? Do you know what I mean? So pursuing education, I think, outside of the corporate environment is super important. So I think that's a huge driver of portfolio careers. But I also think too, people are far more open now to exploring different ways of working.
Yes.
So part-time work, job share, things like that, they can become quite difficult within traditional organisations or structures. They're quite unnecessarily difficult in many cases, when people return, from sabbaticals or maternity leave or paternity leave and so forth. And sometimes they want to go back part-time, they want a job share. And the organisation doesn't really sort of understand
It's a bit square peg, round hole, right?
Correct. So that's when I think people start to think, well, actually, if I'm already looking to spend, only 3 days a week in the office, what could I be doing, with those other 2 days? And is it study? Is it board work? Is it voluntary work?
Yes.
Is it mentoring?
Yes.
So you've got this other sort of genesis
of yourself.
of yourself. And that's where I find people really like to follow their passion. So you can be in a role and be good at it.
Yes.
And be extremely competent and well regarded, but it may not be your passion.
Yes.
Whereas these other things are a chance for you to explore that.
Yeah. Well, for me personally, a lot of what I get as nourishment outside of my core role, which is a very fulfilling and busy role, I must admit, is sort of more of that academic and intellectual stimulation. And I think, seeing further study is something that is already a big part of people's portfolio career is a great way to think about, right? Like everyone says constantly, you need to keep learning, and particularly in today's society, right?
Exactly.
And so people seeing that as part of their career rather than them having to sacrifice some part of their career, I think is a wonderful way to think about it. Nicole, could you reflect a little bit more on some of the big career moves or career pivots that you've made? You've worked at some of the largest companies, not just in Australia, but globally. Those are quite different types of organizations, like working at a NAB or CBA Westpac. I expect is quite different to an AT Kearney or a Capgemini or a Gartner. And I'm just, again, I'm curious around, like, how have you made key career decisions? Why did you move at different parts of your career and life to those different ways of working?
It's a really, really good question. And I think that perhaps I was a little bit ahead of the curve in the sense that I actually did move careers at that sort of age of about 40. I had a very, very long career in banking. I had started on the graduate program and gone through. I'd obviously studied economics and law at Sydney University, and I thought that I would do the rotation, end up in a role in banking forever.
Right. Yeah.
I met my husband. He was also a banker. He was I think close to 24, 25 years at Westpac.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of those things you always think on the basis of your own limited experience.
Yes.
And it was a good uh, organizations like the big banks are incredibly good. You can move around, you can try different
Yeah,
things,
you
and
can
so
have
forth.
quite diverse careers
You
by
can.
staying in one organisation.
They're very encouraging of you, and they were all, in fact, I think, very supportive of women in their careers. So I will
Yes.
say that, and I had my two children, one I had at CBA and one I had at NAB, and both organisations, I have to say, were absolutely
Yeah,
wonderful.
wonderful.
And then later at Westpac, when I had the daycare juggles and the school
Yes.
runs and so forth, they were great too.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said for these large organisations that actually have scale
Yeah, and the
and stability
and sort
can
of
accommodate.
extracurricular things they can do
Exactly.
to support. Yeah.
But I was getting more and more interested in technology. I'd obviously done my master's in technology. I was seeing that banking was going to become basically a technology-driven business.
Yes.
And so I started to actively look at how I could get involved in things like startups and scale-ups, because I had a
Yeah.
good business brain and I had had all that good training, but I wanted to be sort of building and doing a little bit more. And from there, I made the move into consulting, and consulting, which is, so different to being in a bank. It took me a while. I had to go down and across, do you know what I mean, to go up again. So I did take a pay cut. I took a title cut to change, to move across, because I
Okay.
had to, I had to learn a new trade
Mm.
effectively. I had great skills, but I still had to learn. And I'm very pleased I did that, because I think that it not only refreshed me, but it allowed me to get involved in something that I think is genuinely an industry that will take you anywhere. And you're also, I think, then, you're following what you're interested in, but you're also at the forefront. So I think tech gives you that ability just to see that little bit further.
Yeah, see around corners almost.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, that's the two halves of my
Yeah.
career, and I'm obviously now in the second half,
Yes.
and I've got another 5 years to make them two completely equal halves.
Right.
But I heard a fantastic expression. You're in the final third now, because careers are so much longer.
Yes.
So I might get through this second half and then go completely, into a portfolio.
Yeah. Hearing you reflect on that, Nicole, it makes me curious around whether you consciously decided that career breadth was a strategy, or did you only see the pattern in hindsight?
I think I just followed what I liked.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens with most people.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like a good investment strategy.
Yeah.
If you invest in things you understand, they
Yeah.
always say you should invest
Yeah,
in
surely.
companies you understand.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think it was Warren Buffett sort of like.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Warren always says that. And you never, should stray too far from that. So I've just followed things that I enjoyed doing, and now I have diversified.
Yes.
I feel a lot more resilient.
Yes.
I have to admit, in myself and
Yes.
in this current environment.
Yes.
Obviously, people might look back in 10 years' time and think, oh, yes, they had that podcast at that time when all the layoffs were happening, when there was
Yeah.
massive geopolitical disruption.
I think we are at an extraordinary moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's this very, very, very strong inflection point where we've got to, basically, do we move forward or do things go off the rails? And I think it's going to take a lot of resilience. It's going to take a lot of, people pulling together.
Yes.
And also understanding that AI presents absolutely huge challenges for us, and there is fear associated with anything new.
Yes.
But it also creates massive opportunity.
100%. Yeah. I can't remember a time in my lifetime
Agreed.
where there's so much opportunity, so much uncertainty. right? And those
Very much agree.
two things, I think, it's quite hard for people to hold those two things in their mind sometimes because it's a bit of cognitive
It is.
dissonance, right?
And fear clouds the mind.
Exactly.
So it's very hard to see things clearly and logically
Yes, yes.
when you're emotional.
Yes,
That's one thing
yes.
I really know. And you know the old adage your mum always told you, never make decisions when you're emotional.
Yes. That's why I pause before I send emails, you know?
Just read it through one last time.
Yeah.
And I think we're at that stage where, you know, we've got to pick our mindset.
Yes.
And it's the importance of picking your mindset as an individual, but also
Yes.
how you work within teams and how you work within the
Absolutely.
greater part of all these stakeholders you're interacting with.
I love the concept that you touched on, which is that the diversity of experiences builds resilience, right? Like if I think about hard moments in my life, and we all go through hard moments in life,
Yes.
it is so much easier to choose your mindset in those moments if you've been exposed in a sort of bite-sized way to discomfort. And that,
Absolutely.
that's a big reason why I push myself out of my comfort zone deliberately, is so that I can build the muscle to cope when things go wrong.
Yes.
And so,
Which they will.
which they will, they always will, right? Like, you know, like there's very little that we actually have in control of in life other than our mindsets.
Yes. Yes, it's the old adage of can't control what others do to you, but you can control how you react.
100%.
That is literally the sum total of what we can do as human beings.
That's right. That's right. I'm going to take you back to a coffee we had a few weeks ago, Nicole. We had a nice little coffee catch up.
We did.
And I came away from that very energized because I think I was sharing with you a little bit about some of the frameworks I've been teaching. And you shared with me some of the frameworks that you'd been teaching. And I think we bonded over analogies. And so you spoke about this analogy of an open plan zoo.
Yes.
And a way of thinking about leadership, transformation, innovation through that lens. So what's the idea in sort of 30 seconds?
Look, what I've seen is in many cases, large organisations do not do innovation well because what they first seek to do is they seek to control creativity like it's something that could be out of control. Do you know what I mean? So they sort of approach it as first we've got to make sure that we've got an environment where if anything goes off the rails, we can very, very quickly pull it back in. And innovation is, by its very nature, disruptive, uncomfortable, fast-moving, you know, and very often you're doing things that people haven't seen before. So it's naturally uncomfortable. So if you have a large organisation that's seeking to put cages, and we use the adage of the zoo, if you walk through a traditional zoo, you know, you've got your animals very, very much, you know, controlled in small spaces and, you know, they are, I think, you know, it's the old adage, if you put an elephant, you know, in a cage, it'll only grow to a certain size. But if you let it roam, it will grow to its full size and so forth. The same with the bonsai analogy. It's actually a tree, like an elm or a birch or a you know, a cherry tree or whatever, that in the ground, in the right environment, fed, watered, given sunlight, will grow to a magnificent size, you know, size. But if you keep it constrained in a very small, it will only ever reach that size. And I think that's the same with creativity. So it's like room to roam. Is my adage.
So Western Plains Zoo, not
Western
Taronga Zoo.
So if you go to Dubbo Zoo and you go around for the day, you can drive around. It's a wonderful, large property, and you are able to see the animals very much in their natural habitat. And you'll find that they are, you know, obviously far happier. The health of the animals is much better. I think San Diego Zoo also is the same.
The gold standard,
It's the gold standard, exactly. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, in the big banks, you know, where all of them have had various incubators, they've all had things like the garage
Yes.
or the
X15 Ventures.
exactly,
Yeah.
and things like that. And then also universities. So universities have incubators.
Oh, yeah, Genesis.
Absolutely, and
MLC
so forth.
sponsors
So,
that, yeah.
and I think the intent is great.
Yes.
It's bringing these wonderful exotic creatures called entrepreneurs and innovators
Yeah.
in, but oh my God, they're scary.
Yeah,
And they
yeah.
could take a bite
Yeah.
out of us, or they could, act in a
Do
highly
something
unpredictable.
against what we would expect, yes.
And that for me is a bit like the zoo analogy.
Yeah,
So for
yeah.
me, it's how do you give support and control in a safe environment? Obviously, you don't want the lion, coming, across the
You jugular
trench
off.
and so forth. But at the same time, you want to be able to learn from the lion in its natural habitat.
Yes.
So for me, I think it's that balance of giving people enough autonomy, enough agency, enough freedom, but also being able to support, observe, and learn from them.
Yes. I love the analogy, because I always think about sort of the more frame you give people, the more freedom they can have,
Completely.
right? And it was
Yes.
something that I also heard at INSEAD. We had a Olympic mental coach. He coached the Belgian Olympic team.
Oh,
He had all these beautiful pithy one-liners, and one of them was this one-liner of more frame, more freedom, and it's
yes.
sort of been drilled into my head. And it makes me wonder, most leaders, I think they speak with experience constraint as the enemy of innovation in some ways.
Absolutely.
But, you've built a framework that sort of says that constraint is the condition for it. It gives you the guardrails that allows people the freedom to innovate within those guardrails. And I'm curious, from your career, where did that conviction come from, or where did that insight come from, that the frame grants the freedom?
Look, I have been in environments where I've sort of pushed the boundaries internally. And if I think back to my roles, in banking at CBA, at NAB, and at Westpac, we did things that were out of the box
Okay, yeah.
in my area. So, for instance, at NAB, we, there was a business need, there was a lack of footprint that we had, and our ATM network was by far the smallest out of the big four. So we came up with the idea of doing an alliance, with the mutual banks, with the Cuscal network and
Yep.
it became NAB Ready,
Yeah.
NAB Ready ATM. Now, that was a completely different sort of thinking
Yes.
for a large bank which was used to owning everything.
Yes.
But we had some wonderful support from the board and the chief executive retail at the time, who were interested in doing creative things. And they wanted the best for customers. So they were prepared, do you know what I mean, to do things differently and to have alliances where generally, do you know what I mean, they don't. They like to, sort of be the alpha and the omega of their networks. So we did that. So I learnt quite early on that these things could be done, but they need to be done in a way that the board and the senior executive
Felt
can get
safe.
happy,
Yeah.
exactly, and be safe. So the compliance aspects, the security aspects and so forth are incredibly important.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time on those. Later on, fast forward through to, the work I was doing with Westpac when they were doing the open banking.
Yes.
And so forth, again, with the consumer data right and
Yes,
things
yes,
like
yes,
that,
yes.
getting people comfortable
Yes.
with sharing your information with third-party providers and so
Yes.
forth. It's almost like you've got to seek first
Yes.
to educate,
Yes.
then people will understand, and then they'll buy in.
Yes.
I think sometimes with innovation in large organisations, people get discouraged because it does take longer.
Yeah.
And I know that when I've been in smaller organisations and startups, you can do things quickly. I mean, you can.
Yeah.
We could have a meeting this afternoon.
Yes.
Come to an agreement.
Yes.
We would have
it in production by the morning.
have it in production tomorrow. It'd be out in the marketplace in a week.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Doesn't happen that way.
No.
But I think if you look at the platforms of disruption and the waves of disruption, that are happening. What you have to do is push past that anxiety,
Mm.
that initial anxiety. Make sure that you're really clear on your governance and strategy, your North Star,
Yes.
which in the case of both banks was, we want things to be better for our customers,
Yeah.
and then, constantly sort of make sure you're coming back to your baseline of what success looks like.
Mm.
And you can't over communicate,
No.
I think, when you're innovating as well, because there'll be a tendency, do you know what I mean, to get so involved.
100%. Yeah.
And I've done that as well. I've been tunnel vision, task focused, down. We've got to get this out.
Yeah.
We've got to get it in production. And you're not taking people on the journey.
Oh,
And that
100%.
for me was a key learning.
Early wins are so important to build momentum when you're doing anything new. And also, I had a meeting yesterday where I said this very phrase: if you're doing something cool and interesting, don't hide your light for too long.
Correct.
Because people, well, what are they up to? Like they've been,
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I haven't heard from them in a
beaving
while.
her away for so long. I've got no idea what they're up to, and no one likes to feel
I've
like
seen
that.
a lot of invoices.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's the worst feeling ever. You used an analogy at the start, which I'd like to come back to if it's all right, Nicole, around thinking of your career like a trunk with tree branches.
Yes.
I've been thinking about this a lot lately as I've sort of leaned a bit more into my portfolio career. There is a risk sometimes that you can do too much, right? Like
Completely.
we're all
We can
busy
all burn the
people with
candle
full
at both
lives,
ends.
and you can be very motivated, but burn. And so I've been thinking a lot about, like, where do I need to lighten my backpack? Where do I need to prune the tree?
Yes.
And so I'm curious again, how have you made decisions at different points in your life around what needs to give in order for you to find space for some of the other things that feed yourself?
Look, it's really interesting because nothing in life is ever perfect. You'll never have
Correct.
enough time to do everything that you want to
100%.
do.
Yeah.
And I think being comfortable with trade-offs
Yes.
is the best thing that I've
Yes.
become. Yeah. So not only in business, business, nothing is ever perfect and
No,
absolute.
that's right.
You've always got a trade-off. Do I
Yes.
go this direction? Do I go this direction? Do I invest here or do I invest here?
Yes.
That's what business teaches you
Yes.
effectively.
100%.
And you've got to sort of apply that sort of discipline. So
Yes.
don't try to think that you can, it's either all or nothing.
Yes.
At certain times, things will make sense
Yes.
to be traded off.
Yes.
So, for instance, when, you've got younger children or you're caring for aging parents, and I was at a book launch yesterday. A woman had written a book on female leadership, and
Oh, wonderful.
it was extremely interesting, wonderful room of very, very senior, very competent, capable women. And they were all talking about, how hard it is to do everything.
Yeah.
Particularly when we're sandwiched a lot
And
of the
women are
time.
better than men at doing multiple
And women
things.
are better, absolutely. I will say
fully
that.
fall on
I
my
will
sword.
So you've got kids on one hand, you've got aging parents on the other, you've got your relationships.
Yes.
And also the importance of friendships.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And we tend to sacrifice as professionals. We tend to sacrifice a lot of those personal aspects for our careers. And I think it's understanding those trade-offs and are you comfortable making those trade-offs and making sure that the pros and cons and the balance that you are trying to achieve is very, very clear. Because one thing that I probably regret is trying to do too many things at once and then perhaps not reaching the standard. Do you know what I mean? Because I think we're all perfectionists at heart. Anyone who is keen on having a good career and working in this space. So I think be easy on yourself.
Yes.
Know that you've got a trade-off. And also things will always be there. You can always come
Yeah.
back to them. I don't think that there's a shelf life
No.
on your ability to learn.
Yes.
So I think as long as you're learning and you're growing, I think, if you can tick those two things off, then you can always say, look, I'm happy.
Yeah.
That I'm prioritizing
Yeah.
this activity over that one.
Yeah.
But if you're not learning and you're not growing, then all the money in the world is not going to
Yeah.
actually make you feel satisfied.
Well, I think it's actually quite transformative to make deliberate choices. I do think it's quite common that people pursue their career path or pursue their life path, and they wake up one day and go, "How did I get here?"
Exactly.
Um,
At what point was there a moment where I
that I
could have gone
chose, yeah,
exactly when
yeah,
I chose this path?
yes,
And a lot of people
yeah,
they don't actually know
yeah,
that.
and making more active choices, smaller choices, being more in touch with the fact that there is a trade-off, I think is just a wonderful way to think about moving through life, because at least if you're deliberate, you only really have yourself to reflect on and say, well,
Correct.
I chose this, right? So I can unchoose it as
Yes.
well. It gives you a lot more agency, I think,
I
over.
think the agency is really important, and I think the fact that we should never become slaves
Mm,
to our careers.
mm,
I think a career will never love you back.
mm.
We all
As
know
much as you
that.
want it
As
to.
much as you wanted to, and as much as you may love it,
Yeah.
jobs come and go. Your co-workers, you'll make a couple of, lifelong
Lifelong friends.
friends,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I have those, and I
So do I. Yeah.
cherish them.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of your co-workers, it will be a point in time
Mm, mm.
relationship. So don't forget, do you know what I mean, to still have, your own,
Nourish all parts. Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
your own social networks
Yes.
and your own learning intellectual
Yes.
frameworks and being able to have outlets for your
Yeah.
creativity beyond your
Yeah.
career.
Nicole, you've had a very diverse career. I was wondering if you could maybe just reflect on two moments for me. One that you're really a proud moment in your career, and maybe one where it was a difficult moment in your career.
Um, I think probably the proudest moment in my career would have been the period during the GFC.
Mm,
And I'm going back now to sort of that period, 2008 to about 2012
mhm,
to maybe 2013. Um, banks were in a really tough spot.
mm,
I was at National Australia Bank at the time. My role was moved to Melbourne. I had a very new baby, and NAB were great. They had a fantastic daycare
mm,
centre
mm.
on premises, and I was able to take Zoe in with me 3 days a week to daycare, leave to breastfeed her during the day. I could just go down in the lifts. This was at 225 George in
Okay, yeah,
Sydney,
yeah, yeah.
and it was Sydney Cove, and NAB had
We might have been in the same
subsidised.
building at the same
Yeah,
time
I
because I
think
was at
so.
Deloitte
Were
at
you
the
at Deloitte? Yeah,
time.
exactly. And NAB had subsidised a number of places, and so I had to go back to work, and I was thinking, oh heavens, how are we going to do
How are we
this?
going to
My
juggle all
husband was at
this?
Westpac,
Yeah,
how are we
yeah,
going to do? And they said, no, there's this fantastic centre. And they helped me. They helped me with that. They got me a place. They subsidised that. And I was going down to Melbourne, on a weekly basis, and more and more people were finding that their jobs were just not there. So a
mm.
very similar situation to what's
Yeah,
happening
yeah,
now in
this,
tech, but this was obviously just financial
yeah,
services.
yeah, yeah,
And it was probably the hardest time because not only did, I have massive, job insecurity, as everyone
as ever
did
did, yeah.
working in finance, but I also had this, sort of tug with my daughter and wanting to be with her, but knowing that I really had to,
Mm,
stay working
mm, mm.
and so forth from a financial basis and keep the role I had for as long as
Yes,
I could. So I was very, very, very proud of how I got through that.
yes,
And we call out to my husband as well and my parents who were extremely supportive
yeah.
throughout that time. Couldn't it takes a village to get through
I
these
think about that a lot.
times.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
And it was very tough. So now I'm very sanguine when I
yeah.
look at things and obviously I've been made redundant since
Yeah,
then. I've had jobs where I've arrived and they've said, actually, no, we're a multinational now, funding's been cut.
yeah,
Thank you for turning up, but the job doesn't
yeah,
exist
yeah, yeah,
anymore,
wow, yeah,
things like that.
yeah,
But there's another job and it's like, that's not the job I
yeah.
signed
I
up
didn't
for.
sign up for. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
So there's been all these moments where I've been very proud, but
yeah.
I think, the combination of that perfect storm
Mm,
financially, young child,
yes,
young mother, straight back at work, I think,
I'm getting through that. Yeah,
getting through that, I'm extremely
yeah,
proud. I think it made me such a stronger person. It taught me the resilience,
Yeah.
right? And so it's sort of like the most difficult thing and the thing that I'm sort of proudest.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Go.
It's it makes complete sense though, because I always say to people, difficulty is the teacher,
Totally.
and it is the difficult moments in life where you learn the most, and the difficult moments in career.
Exactly.
And like I've worked in sales and growth roles a lot, and I love winning. But to be honest, if you're always winning, you don't
You don't
learn
learn
anywhere near
much.
as much as when you're losing, to be honest. And
They say the best lessons are the hardest
yeah,
ones.
yeah,
And I completely agree
yeah.
that sentiment.
Right now, a lot of people are going through some pretty hard times in
Oh,
in Australian
completely.
society, and
Completely.
some of that's cost of living, some of that is geopolitical uncertainty, some of that is identity disruption with artificial intelligence and AI, and there's some signs of emerging unemployment
Mm,
as well.
there is, yes.
Um,
And hidden
Hidden
employment.
unemployment. Yeah.
Yes.
You've had a master's of AI since before it was fashionable.
I like to say I was in it.
What were you seeing at the time that made you think this was a good idea? And, what did you know then that people are only discovering now?
Oh, very much the key takeaway from and I loved studying, obviously, with what was then known as expert systems and algorithmic artificial intelligence. I loved the whole thought process around, sort of developing, and you had to obviously develop programs, and algorithms yourself,
Yes.
obviously, to do this, but of creating, a process that could be autonomous, that could run. Now, obviously, that was a long way from this situation where
Mm.
we're now in. But I think it taught me that AI and any autonomous processes are only as good as the data
Mhm.
and the design is actually the foundational
Mm.
elements of them. So a bit like a house, if you don't have the foundations laid
Solid.
properly,
Yeah.
if you don't have, the wiring
Mm.
and the plumbing and so forth, it doesn't matter how nice things appear to be, they'll be hell to live in,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So, and you'll be just constantly repairing and patching.
Mhm.
So for me, I really learned, and I did data management as well in, a parallel course.
Oh, okay.
So I was doing the two, and I really, the ability to use data well, to recognize,
Yes.
do you know what I mean, the importance of it, and to understand its application, I think is critical
Yes. Yes.
for AI. And that's where a lot of people, I think, are seeing outputs from AI
Yes.
that are either biased or hallucinating and so forth, and saying AI doesn't work. It's actually not that AI doesn't
No.
work. It's that it's the data that's
It's garbage.
drawing. Exactly. So it's a bit like your body. You
Yeah.
put rubbish in, you'll
Yeah.
feel ill,
Yeah.
right? And you won't be able to reach your full potential. So for me, I think that that taught me very early the hygiene of AI, but also too, I think that there is absolutely still the very, very strong case for human in the loop.
Yes. Yeah. No.
So I don't think there will come a time in our lifetimes where computers are completely sentient.
No.
I think that's still some considerable way off. They'll get very, very good at mimicking
Mm.
humans, and to the point probably where you probably couldn't tell the difference.
Mm.
And the Turing test, has been passed,
Has already
as
been
we
passed.
know.
Yeah.
So that's there. But I think if you truly, truly want to have that classic sort of, you know, human judgment, there's still a place for that. So yeah, that was what I really took
Yeah.
away at that early
Yeah.
stage when things were at that sort of nascent. It was like a toddler.
Yeah.
Now it's like an angry teenager, and it's talking back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very different mindset
Yeah.
that you've got to have with AI now.
I wrote an article recently around what do humans need to cultivate in a world of AI, and I used this phrase of taste. right? In a world of AI,
Mm.
your unique taste, your unique judgment is something that being in touch with is I think quite powerful. And it's something that the best music producers do really well.
Isn't it incredible the way they do that?
They know instantly whether they like it or they don't, and they don't feel the need to explain themselves because they've seen so many artists for so long. Um, and it's made me think a lot about, what can professionals do to be in touch with their taste, to
Mm.
cultivate their taste,
Yes, the refinement of
to refine the
Mm.
taste. Like I use the analogy of a wine
Yes,
taster
improving your
and
palate.
improving your palate,
Mhm.
but also knowing how the terroir
Yes,
affects the blend, right?
absolutely.
And I'm curious, you've been teaching quite a bit in this space.
Yes,
Students are using AI
they are.
quite actively. How is the usage of AI changing the way in which people are learning and teaching? And how do you know whether someone's really developing their taste or is just using a tool to express a pretty dull, bland
Mm.
blend of something?
Look, I think what AI can do really, really well is like the analogy I would use is great grammar doesn't make a great writer,
Mm.
right? So you don't read a novel cover to cover and can't put it down because the grammar's
Grammar's
perfect.
perfect. Yeah, yeah,
Right? I mean, it's a part.
yeah.
You want obviously
You don't want it to be
the
rubbish.
rules
Yeah.
to be followed and it to be legible
Yeah,
and the syntax to be right.
yeah.
But just as grammar doesn't make a great writer, um, you know, information and sources don't necessarily make a great piece of research or
Yes, yes,
a great
yes.
assignment. And both of my children are now at university. My daughter's doing PPE here
Okay.
at
At
University of
University of Sydney.
Sydney,
Yep.
and is doing her first lot of assignments.
Fantastic.
And is struggling
Okay.
because obviously there's the temptation.
No,
Said
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you can use it to a certain, but
Yeah.
we want your point of view.
Yes,
We want your perspective.
yes,
And that's what I've sort of, you must have a point of view.
yes,
And to do that, you actually have to read.
yes,
And I think reading is becoming underdone.
yes,
That's one thing that I'm very concerned about with
yes.
the students I'm working with. They're not probably reading in the way that we did.
Mm,
They're not spending those hours just, sort of researching and looking, do you know what I mean, at
mm,
the different opinions and so
mm,
forth. They're getting a filtered version of everything,
mm,
and they're taking then from that. Now, that's great because, if we were judged on efficiency
mm,
of writing, that would be the gold standard.
mm,
But just because you're efficient at something doesn't mean you're good at it. And
mm,
the quality, do you know what I mean, is still
mm.
there. So my son, by contrast, is doing law and he's in his final year of law at UTS. And he uses AI a little. Obviously legal research
Yes.
is very time consuming, but he is still in the law library, reading the cases,
Yeah.
holding the books. And I think there's something to be said
Yes.
for actually doing the old
Doing the work.
school reading.
Yeah.
And you're at university to learn how to think. I mean, that's
Yes.
what universities are meant to be
Yes. Yes.
teaching us, is to have critical thinking skills, right? They're not actually teaching us to get
Yes.
information really, really fast and then regurgitate it
Yes.
in a format, right, that can be
That's right.
marked and
You're learning how to think. You're learning how to
keyword
communicate your
checked.
ideas.
Correct.
Yeah.
So for me, you're actually doing the university a disservice if you're doing that. You're actually not there for the right reason. You
Yeah.
should be at university.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I always remember the best times I had at university where I really, really felt that I cracked open something and really understood it was tutorials
Yes.
and coming together with your peers, in groups and
The dreaded group work.
excuse me, the group assignment, which everyone hates.
Yeah.
Now everyone just wants to go and do their own assignment with Claude.
Yeah.
Claude and I are doing my assignment
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
But I think that was the best time where somebody will say something and just suddenly the pieces will fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll come together and you'll have thrashed something out.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's great preparation for the world of work too, because very rarely can we bring something from start to finish on our own.
100%. Yeah. it makes me think that the most powerful thing that you can do right now is go back to basics on things.
Completely.
Reading,
Oh, and writing. I mean, you see both of us, we're
That's right. We've got
holding
pens,
pens and
right?
paper because there's just a way that you can synthesize your thoughts on paper
Exactly right.
that is just not there
Yeah.
in any other medium.
Yeah, reading and writing and comprehension and speaking are a way to make sense of your thoughts. And it's very, very difficult to do that through a tool like AI.
It is.
And whilst I'm an AI evangelist,
Of course, yeah,
I
as am I. But
I now build deliberate friction into all of my tasks that I
yes,
do, because without that deliberate friction, you cannot learn, you cannot. Yeah.
one of the things that I really love about you know, the act of putting things on paper is that you can go back and reflect. That's, I think, part of the rise of journaling.
Mm.
You know, because you actually then have the ability to go back and reflect later and say, oh, I did feel
Yeah.
that way at that time, and so forth. You know, it's cathartic.
Yeah, it is.
Writing is wonderful, and
Yes.
of course, reading is a wonderful pastime.
100%. Well, the time's flown by, Nicole, and we're almost out of time. So whilst you're in a reflective mood, I might ask you a question I ask all my guests to finish, and it's a little bit about, going back to your childhood and reflecting on any beliefs that you might have had when you were younger that you've had to let go of to become who you are today.
Look, I think I've had to let go of what my definition of success was like.
Mm.
So I think you're taught at school that success tends to come with accolades, prizes, and you know yourself, you know that every year, you know, you'd wait for the end of the
That's
year
right.
and the prize list would be read out. Am I
Yeah.
going to be on stage this year?
Yeah.
Have I missed out? And so
Yeah.
forth. And it's quite a reward culture
It is. Yeah.
that we live in. Now, as you get older, that reward becomes more monetary
Yes.
rather than
Or title or status
status, or maybe public you know,
Yeah.
if you're
Accolades,
really,
yeah.
really, really impressive, you know, you get an Order of Australia or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that, and that's wonderful, and not to take anything away from that, but that all those things are just one small part of what actually defines success. And if you look, the world is full of very, very unhappy people who are highly successful. And I think that my definition of success has changed from that very simplistic,
Yes.
very, very vanilla
Yes.
view and very Western
Yes.
idea of success, you know,
Yes.
which is that success
Climb the ladder.
is climb the ladder. It doesn't matter how hard and long and the struggle, because that prize at the end is what's important, as opposed to, say, more of an Eastern philosophy, which is it's the journey, not the
It's
destination.
the journey and it's the legacy that
Correct,
you leave.
and it's the people who you've pulled up behind you.
Yeah, and
you know,
who you've left a mark on.
correct.
Yeah.
So for me, that's the change of
Yeah.
coming from a very Western Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you know, world
Yes.
of what success looked like, and a lot of that being material and title
Associated
and
with
things
that.
like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Social success.
Yeah.
To having
Inner peace.
but also too being able to follow your passions. And
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that if you are successful, you've got time to pursue things that you actually
You
want
love
to
and you care
pursue
about.
and you love.
Yeah.
And that can be family, that can be friends, that can be
Yeah.
hobbies, that can be study,
Yes.
cultural
Yes.
pursuits. It's having that freedom,
Yes.
that time to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sign of a truly successful person.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground. I can see how you've been able to have such a diverse portfolio career, because this conversation's gone in lots of different directions and I've enjoyed every moment of it. So
Thank you.
thank you again. And this has been the Reinventors Mindset.